Hi, it's Tammy. I wanted to go over a couple of things today with regards to histamine and breast cancer. Um, every time I make one of these videos, they come up through just an inspiration. It's like all of a sudden one day I wake up and it's like, hey, let's talk about this. And so I know I've talked about histamine in the past. I know I talked about breast cancer in the past, but it's just it's been on my mind, especially since one of a recent interaction with someone that I greatly appreciate the opportunity to be in her presence and to be able to assist. And I mean that from the bottom of my heart, because these things, there's so much to our health, and it's virtually impossible to think of everything all at one time unless I'm going to put together a textbook, and that doesn't make any sense to do at this point. I would like to do that at another point. Well, like I said, there's so many factors that go into health, and to put these talks together in such a way and piece them together so that they begin to make sense to the people that it pertains to. There's a lot of information on the internet about histamine intolerance. There's a lot of information about breast cancer, prevention, cures, awareness. And we all know, more than likely know somebody who has had an experience with breast cancer. Unfortunately, I know more people than I care to count. So with that said, though, one of the things that researchers are doing is trying to figure out what the heck is causing breast cancer. And just like with anything else, there's a spectrum. There's different types. There's different relationships as to chemically. We do know that a lot of breast cancer is related to estrogen. It's primarily related to the way the body metabolizes estrogen. And there's a lot of us that have potential issues on within the liver, on some enzymes within the liver that metabolize estrogen. And if it's not functioning properly, you end up producing a toxic form of estrogen, which has been found to be linked to breast cancer. I've talked about this before, and but the one thing I never suggested in that last video was the relationship to histamine. Now, again, in other subsequent videos, I've talked about the relationship between histamine and estrogen. When histamine goes up, estrogen goes up. When estrogen goes up, histamine goes up. And then you have yeast issues too, because that begins to climb. And we see this a lot in autism. We also see it a lot in anxiety. What chemical actually triggers anxiety? Your guess is as good as mine. It depends on what else is manifesting within that person's being. So along the lines of breast cancer, though, there is a particular gene called the HER2 gene, which is necessary for tissue development. And with the right combination of other chemistry within the body, it can produce, and has been found to produce, and be linked to tumors and cancer. So, this really, it's being able to regulate estrogen is important. More importantly, it's really necessary to understand how to help the body metabolize estrogen. Now, is it just estrogen? No, maybe not. It very well could be that you have significant histamine issues. And the result of that is a pronounced level of estrogen, and thereby leading to cancer, because it is the immune system. It's the immune system trying to protect the body, and it's just doing it in a detrimental way. So whether or not it's histamine that's high or estrogen that's high, the bottom line is they both become elevated with time, because one feeds off of the other one. And this is another reason why, especially if you have breast cancer and it's linked to HER2 and you do chemotherapy, the potential for yeast is extraordinary. And so being able to can keep the yeast down and metabolize carbohydrates so the glycolysis cycle actually works better, and eliminating fermented foods, cured foods, as well as foods with vinegar in them is essential. And I say that because so many people, we talk about body ecology, and you know, there's a school of thought that a very acidic body leads to cancer. Well, there is some validity to that, but you know, it's really kind of hard to gauge where the acidity is coming from. My assertion is that acidity rises when the body is not able to metabolize the carbohydrates and break down the sugars even further. That's when the acidity occurs. It's not necessarily the foods that are alkaline forming or acid forming. Yes, they do play a factor, but not as much as the body's ability to convert sugars. There's where you have the acidity issue, and that's where you're also going to see an increase in yeast. So if you've gone through chemo and you're struggling with yeast, the one thing you want to do is get yourself on a coenzymated B complex, because number one, that's going to assist with the regulation and conversion of sugars. You're going to want to, like I said earlier, avoid any fermented foods. This is like yogurt, kefir, kombucha, and trust me, I know what the bottles of kombucha say. At least the original kombucha talks about how a woman with breast cancer would drink this, and I think she was even the founder to this, and the benefits that she received from it. Not to take away from anybody's packaging, but I don't necessarily agree with that theory, simply because if the body's not breaking down and converting sugars properly and it's over fermenting, it's creating more of an acidic field, and it's raising your histamine levels and potentially increasing your estrogen, thereby fueling the yeast. So it's a very I don't want to call it complex. It is, however, very important to understand that when one chemical reaction occurs, there are other ones. And in this case, those three factors right there are all interwoven. Predominantly, though, like I say, with the estrogen and the histamine. So those foods that I mentioned, the fermented foods, foods with vinegar in them, as well as cured foods, will all trigger a histamine reaction. And with that said, if you do have histamine issues, if you have a tendency to even develop cysts, what happens with histamine is it is used to produce mast cells. Mast cells are what generate tissue, scar tissue, in the event of trauma. And this is, again, what occurs with cysts. For those of us who develop cysts on a regular basis, this particular gene is being overly expressed. And depending, again, on the sequencing of the rest of your genome and how the chemicals are playing themselves out, it could eventually lead to cancer. This is not to cause alarm. This is merely to educate so that you have an upper hand in preventing, especially if you are predisposed to breast cancer. These are really important things to keep in mind. And the more you regulate these chemicals, it's not a lifetime thing. It's not like you have to avoid all these particular foods for the rest of your life. It's until you get things under control. And the best way to get things under control is to include it through the use of essential oils. Why? Because the essential oils actually help to modify the genetic expression. And over the long term, what ends up happening is the cells are using nutrients, the proper nutrients, and as the cells continue to get the proper nutrients, they begin to produce the right chemistry. as I produce the right chemistry, the body begins to find a sense of peace and really begins to restore balance. But it starts from the very, very beginning. You may not recognize it at first. There may not be one symptom that you can relate to any sort of restoration or healing. You have to remain confident that that's what these things do. This is how they come up with the medications that we are taking. So between the combination of the essential oils and paying attention to the foods that you're eating, you can begin to offset any predisposition. You can offset any side effects if you've already gone through treatment for breast cancer. And you can prevent recurrence. That's a really important piece here. It's not just about preventing the onset, it's about preventing the recurrence and realizing what your body does when you take in these high histamine foods. That will help you to gauge how frequently you can eat these foods. Sometimes histamine foods will cause a migraine. Sometimes they cause anxiety because they immediately jack your estrogen levels up. And so it really depends on how you respond to it. But if you can eat them and without any issue, and then all of a sudden have an issue, that's just the sign to stop, to back off for a while. It doesn't mean that you have to eliminate it forever. It just means back off. The body's needing to be reset. Continue to use the essential oils, and they will continue to support you in the proper nutrient utilization. A couple of other supplements that you might want to consider, besides the B complex, are digestive enzymes. You could include probiotics in there. A lot of times there are times that you can get the combination. Those are a better option. And quercetin, Quercetin. Quercetin is a bioflavonoid that is frequently found in the white skin of citrus fruits. It's also artichokes are a good source of quercetin, as is the stevia plant, not the refined stevia. But if you were to just consume the green stevia, you would receive some benefit of quercetin in that as well. I'm just loving today. This is just a really beautiful day here in the sun. We're expecting snow in the next day or so, so might as well soak it up while I can. And so with that said, a couple of ideas for helping to modulate estrogen and support the liver. Avocados support the liver, and beets do as well. If you don't like beets, like I don't like beets, you can make beets into chips, and you can do that through baking, and you get the same benefit. You want to make sure you consume good fats, because that continues to help flush the liver. The reason I'm suggesting this is because the liver is what converts estrogen. So you need to make sure you maintain a healthy liver, and by supporting the digestive system with the enzymes. Walnuts are another good one. But I would really go for more of the avocados, olive oil, coconut oil, as well as the beets for the initial supporting of the liver. Other ideas for helping to regulate estrogen: clary sage is an excellent choice. It actually does help with the liver, and it helps with the metabolism of estrogen into more appropriate chemicals. Avoid lavender at all costs at this point if you are dealing with or looking at potential breast cancer. Therefore, like I say, if you're predisposed or wanting to prevent a recurrence, avoiding lavender as much as you can. I mean, if you like it and you want to possibly, include it in your month, once a month anointing or scenting of a room, then, you're welcome to do so. It's the long-term effects, because yes, they are calming. Yes, estrogen does make us crazy, and yes, histamine does make us anxious, and other things make us anxious. So lavender does have that beneficial soothing component to it. However, long-term, it creates high estrogen levels, which is going to increase your histamine levels. So being aware of that. A couple of other oils for histamine regulation would be frankincense, as well as Roman chamomile, in addition to cedarwood atlas. And then, sorry, I'm just trying to come up with another one. I think that would be where I would stop it for right now. You could, well, I don't want to know. No, I don't want to go any further because, again, we're getting into some fine lines with regards to certain health conditions and kind of traipsing on, yeah, some thin ice there. So I'm going to stop with those because those are safe. There are no contraindications with those when it comes to including them with medications. Yeah, the overall benefit would be good for just about everybody. So if you have any questions, by all means, let me know. This is for you. And as like I say, I really don't sit around and think about what I want to talk about. It's just all of a sudden one day I wake up and it's like, oh, hey, let's talk about this. And this is one that came up with for me the other day. And I thought more people would benefit than just one. Because I know this is a particular genetic sequence that involves breast cancer can be very similar among people depending on how theirs manifests. So do you have to have a genetic test? No. What you need to have is understand what your potential is. And that said, there is one other note on this. It doesn't have to be. I talk about being predisposed, okay? You know, and that's where we typically go is like, well, if it runs in the family, right? If mom or grandma and any of the women on either side of the family, even if dad had prostate cancer, those are all pretty good indicators that, you're facing something along the same lines. That said, it doesn't have to be that way. Our epigenetics, our methylation pathway, it changes so rapidly based on the environment that we're exposed to, where we live, what we eat, what medications we consume, what body care products we're using. These are all factors, the stress level that we are under. These are all factors that can adjust and the epigenome and create adaptations that would set somebody up for breast or prostate cancer. So it does not have to run in the family. But what I will say about that is that you're going to probably have already seen some kind of hormonal issues. A lot of people have hormonal issues. I'm going to venture out and say that we all have hormonal issues. And I don't mean that in the craze like I'm nearing menopause or PMS. It's everybody has some degree of hormonal issues. Maybe it's a thyroid. Maybe it's, insulin. Could be sleep, because melatonin is a hormone. The adipose tissue is part of the endocrine system. So if you have a tendency to carry extra weight, fat, that is a sign of a hormonal issue. I've worked with Amish people firsthand, close up, and by a certain age, and it's not very old, the women start to lose their hair. I've seen them lose the hair on the top of their head and then actually start to grow facial hair. That's a huge indication that there's a testosterone problem. So a hormonal imbalance can, given the right epigenetics and offspring, can trigger a breast or prostate cancer issue. So it's no longer that we have to be predisposed to this genetically. It doesn't have to be something we inherit. It could very well be something that is generated through our own experiences. And a really good indicator, like I say, is that if you've got people in your family before you that have been dealing with hormonal issues, and it's always wise to talk to people about this, so that you can begin to, and for that matter, I'm just going to say it's wise to begin to regulate your chemistry naturally without even worrying about it. Paying attention to what the histamine does. Noticing when you feel anxious, noticing when insomnia is worse than other times, noticing when you have pain and you feel depressed or you're irritable. There's a lot of indicators where the histamine is off. There's a lot of indicators where the estrogen is off. We are getting the signs every day. And so if we begin to regulate and include essential oils into our daily regime, with long-term effects in mind, and we also factor in how we juggle our food and in response to how our body reacts to it, these will all make a huge difference. You know, we hear people talk all the time about healthy diets and eating more alkaline forming food. Well, let me just let you know, the body needs protein, the body needs carbohydrates, and the body needs fats. So for anybody who is living a highly restrictive diet of, you know, no protein or low carbs or low fat, you are hurting yourself. And if you would like some guidance on that, I'm happy to give you input into that and how you can begin to restore and bring your levels of more of a balanced diet, most importantly, so that you are getting full benefit of every nutrient that you consume. I was sitting in a room full of people just a little while ago, and I was thinking about all of this, and there was a long table, and I'm going to say approximately 6 or 7 people. Everybody at that table, children included, were mildly obese. I don't necessarily ever make a point of noticing that, but it was based on the thoughts that I had going on in my head about hormonal issues, and how we as a culture don't recognize the fact that most of us are walking around with hormonal imbalances. And when I saw that table and I looked at them, and you know, there's a lot of people that will say, well, they're making poor food choices, and they can't control their eating, and or you name it. You know, there are so many reasons why culturally we look at people and start to judge them and blame them for the shape of their body. And maybe, you know, you would even say that they're not eating, you know, not exercising. And I'm going to just go and let you know that that's a thought process that doesn't work, because knowing that the adipose tissue is in fact part of the endocrine system, and if you see somebody who has excessive amounts of weight and you want to blame the types of food and you want to blame the amounts of food, you know, I'm not going to say this is the case for everybody, but I really want to say that for the majority of people, it's even if they are eating more than what we would consider reasonable, it's because they're hungry. The body is actually starving, and it's starving on a cellular level, and so their appetite increases, and appetite is controlled by hormones, and because they're just not getting, and they're not getting nutrients, and that to me is a major problem, you know, and that's really what this is about, is helping people get the nutrients. You know, searching for cures is great, but when we're talking about breast cancer, the reasons why somebody develops breast cancer, their reasons are, as you know, there's a lot of differences, and at the same time there's a lot of similarities. And if we take out the specific names of the chemical messengers and we just said, you know, a neuroendocrine imbalance, you'd be spot on with every health condition on the planet. It's just really how it plays out due to the lack of proper nutrient utilization. That's our biggest problem. And like I say, the carbohydrates, the fats, and the proteins are essential. And yes, there's some questionable foods that we have. But keep in mind, if you were actually including essential oils into your day and you were assisting your body to take up nutrients in an effective manner, the possibility of that appetite decreasing, the possibility of enjoying something that's just heavenly and really, really bad for you, but without feeling like you have this craving or like you're being bad, that would be ideal, because we have these things, and our mission here is to enjoy as much of life as possible. So this isn't, I'm not going to poo-poo the yummy junk food, because that stuff is fun to eat. It's just when we eat it on a regular basis because we're hungry and we're not getting the nutrients. And that's the reason why people who do go organic or eat healthy diets, as we would consider a healthy diet, they're still not getting the nutrients, because oftentimes those people end up developing health issues as well. And it's not because they necessarily were predisposed. It's simply more about the fact of the misuse of nutrients, and these misuse of nutrients is what's leading to a lot of our health issues, including breast cancer. And when we can assist the body to metabolize these chemicals properly, because it has to metabolize histamine, it has to metabolize estrogen, and it has to assimilate sugars and whatnot. When we can facilitate that in a very simple manner, we are giving ourselves the biggest gift. And the next biggest gift is patience, allowing the body to find its way as we know that these things are working. With that said, if you have any questions, please let me know. I'm here for you. And at this point, I do know I'm done. And I will talk to you all very soon. Thank you, and have a really beautiful day. Bye now.